Welcome to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nic King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox. And together we're here to explore, understand, and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So, whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course.
Hello, welcome back to our now monthly, have you subscribed, Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws with myself, Nic King, and herself, Kate Fox. And it is November. It's the end.
Already? What?
Oh. So what we're going to talk about today, Kate, we're going to talk about autistic people and very specifically paid employment.
Exactly. And this is inspired by a story that got into the news when a young autistic lad had been happily stacking shelves at Waitrose for 4 years as part of his employment programme. He'd put in 600 hours of voluntary work. And then as soon as he asked for a few hours of paid work, head office said no.
This is, isn't it?
Not okay. Yeah. And even though the supermarket, did we say the super? I mean, we can totally say the supermarket.
Very public information. It's Waitrose.
Yes, very public information. It's the one with like the nicest food, actually. Oh, don't go to that supermarket. No, boo. But if you did need some like nice Heston Blumenthal items, do go to that supermarket. It's a ethical and moral dilemma that you will now face because they treated Tom Boyd badly, and we're not happy. In summary, it was Waitrose. Haven't I still not said it? It was Waitrose. But actually, it's not just one branch of Waitrose, is it? Treating autistic people badly in employment. Nic, I know that this is kind of an issue that feels close to your heart and kind of live for you, actually.
I think it has been for a very long time, even back, before, like how we always do before COVID and after COVID. Before COVID, when I was running like my local charity and chairing my local charity, obviously we were all bar eventually one member of staff volunteers. And I always deliberately used to take on young people volunteers, particularly under 18s, because it's really hard for under 18s to get like voluntary like work, because it costs you more in insurance and it's more trouble than it's probably worth, but that was never the point. And I just, why would stacking shelves be a voluntary role for a large multi-million billion, I haven't looked at Waitrose's profits, pound organisation? Why would anything be a voluntary role there? It's not a charity. It's not a community organisation. It is literally capitalism with shelves. And the fact that they let him volunteer for so long.
And it was part of some sort of work placement scheme. And actually, I suppose underlying that then at first is, we, the supermarket, are doing them, the autistic person and the work placement organisation, a favour by giving this person the opportunity to gain skills, experience and confidence that they otherwise would not. Now, this could work for about 12 hours, I reckon.
Is it a favour when money changes hands? Because if you are talking about a scheme where an organisation has provided an autistic adult to another organisation for voluntary work in terms of like a supposed preparation for paid work, money has exchanged hands. Money has exchanged hands between the government, that organisation, and the organisation that takes them on. So that's not a favour. It's still capitalism, and the only person not getting money in that situation is Tom.
And when that situation carries on for 4 years and for 600 hours actually in total, that not a favour. I mean, if anyone ever could have pretended it was, now they cannot, because they are just getting 600 hours of free labour, very, very, very clearly. But actually, there is still such an underlying sense of, but only 30% of autistic people are in employment. I mean, unfortunately, completely untrue statistic because actually there's loads of autistic people in employment, some of them even happily, but many of them masking and being burnt out horribly. Anyway, so that statistic is kind of unhelpful
Yeah.
in certain ways and untrue. Um, because it implies, yeah, well, it increases that element of, but it's so hard for them to have employment, so now we're helping them. Anyway, but it's that whole dependency dynamic, isn't it? We can only conceive of autistic people as helpless people who do not have any.
How is it not the workhouse? How is it not the workhouse?
Ooh,
I know
well,
they have, because I was looking into it, and they have, obviously, because they are a multi-million pound organization and they have lawyers, they do have a modern day slavery statement on their website. How is it not? Somebody
ooh,
sit and explain to me how it's not. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's a bit of a thing
yeah,
where I know they put out a statement or something, or they gave a statement to him or his parents that he couldn't do the full role. And I'm like, but we've been happy for him to what, be in the shop for 600 hours doing most of the role, part of the role. I doubt he was under anyone's feet, otherwise he wouldn't have been there for 600 hours.
absolutely. And it sounds like it was a. I think they did mention something about communication uh, issues. So presumably there was an element of the role of stacking shelves which involved communication.
Well, I would imagine maybe it's like, excuse me, sir, can you point to me where the falafel is? It's
Please,
Waitrose, we're going with falafel.
I think the finest focaccia with studded clementines in, as conceived by Heston Blumenthal. Could you point me there? And
Yeah.
yeah,
And yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I don't go into supermarkets, but I'm going to like imagine that also necessarily 16-year-old or 18-year-old teenagers who are working there aren't particularly the best communicators about where your falafel is either.
no, no, indeed. I mean, you might be lucky to get a.
You,
I mean, possibly in Waitrose, you, I
you
don't
might.
might be a slightly posher class of, but still, yeah. And of course, and quite clearly, there was a role like they could have made a role that really didn't involve a communication element if that wasn't part of what he was up for doing, essentially. Because
And I
it,
do believe that in the end, Asda offered him a job. I don't know if he took it, but I do believe
yeah,
they offered him.
yeah, they offered him two paid 5 hour shifts a week. So an Asda in Cheadle I suppose partly stepping on the clear PR opportunity, but also fairly going, oh, we've got a trained supermarket worker here, clearly a good and reliable worker. Brilliant. We
To
can
falafel standards, not Asda own brand beans. Right?
exactly as to price, as I read their slogan used to be. So, but
Yeah.
actually, there was also, and it only kind of just started investigating this a bit as we started recording, but so I noticed that Greater Manchester now, under the auspices of Mayor Andy Burnham, have a thing they are calling the Be Inclusive, B as in bzz, B, because their symbol is the B, um, Be Inclusive, Neuro Inclusive Code of Practice. And it, I think, on initial inspection looks okay, possibly. It does rely on the dodgy statistics about the existing numbers of people in employment, um, but does say encouraging things like we would regard success as retaining staff and those staff being happy. And we would also regard success as a rate of employment or unemployment for autistic people of 40%, which is in line with other disabilities, not 70% within the Greater Manchester area.
And this is the other thing that we haven't brought this podcast that our listeners might not know, is that actually autistic people have a higher level of unemployment than those with physical disabilities. And I often think, not that they have it, not that the physical disabilities people are doing well, but like in terms of statistics, the autistic people are less employed than those with physical disabilities. But I actually think, because I was hosting a neurodivergence table at Life the other day because somebody there called Davey has my life, and I will do anything for him. Um, and I was sat around, these people who are Newcastle based, who are constantly with autistic people, working with autistic people. Do you know what I mean? And literally, my first question was, what was neurodivergence? Silence. And these people are with autistic people day in and day out. And I'm like, and I think there's an element where, like, if you understand somebody's in a wheelchair, there's also almost like a script and like a plan for how you make your building accessible for wheelchair users. Now, I'm not saying, well, everything's accessible for wheelchair users by any stretch of the imagination, but there is sort of a blueprint for it. And I genuinely, at that table at that point, turned around and went, guys, it's not that deep. Like, it's not that deep that you need to sit there in a terrified silence that you give me the wrong answer.
Yeah, yeah, yes, and I suppose yes, I'm realizing that probably is what it is for them. They were terrified of saying the wrong thing. It's not that they literally had no idea in their head whatsoever, but actually it felt, yeah, unspeakable in case they got it
Wrong.
wrong.
And I think that it's that sort of, and that's sometimes the difficulty when you're thinking about people's neurodivergent, is that we are all incredibly different and we all have very incredibly different needs, and then it starts to really get quite niche after that. And then I think there's a statistic somewhere about, the amount of people who are autistic that are out at work, because obviously, if you are in a wheelchair, people are going to know you're in a wheelchair. If you are autistic, you don't necessarily have to declare it,
No,
and they're
and
not necessarily automatically going to know. And so there's that on top of that, and it's a bit messy and it's a bit nuanced, and I can see why employers who don't, like, my husband's employer, a really significant amount of the staff are neurodivergent. And I think, there's a level of, oh, well, we vaguely know what we're doing there. Do you know what I mean? But I think if you are a small business, you might not be in a position to understand, like, it might be the first autistic person you've met in the wild. And that might feel really scary. And you
oh,
don't know what to do. And then you're so terrified of doing the wrong thing that you do nothing. And then that's often the wrong thing.
yeah. Well, I've just suddenly, you putting it like that has zoomed me into a place of empathy, of imagining if I was a small business owner and I was like, oh, an autistic person, and someone was not me and not autistic and didn't have a life full of autistic people everywhere. Um, I
I mean,
would be, yeah,
yeah,
I'd
what
be
if I
pretty
hired a
scared.
neurotypical? I would need
Exactly.
training.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, your neurotypical employee is going to have certain needs. Oh my God,
Possibly
what
therapy
are
for my
those
very blunt
needs?
and direct communication.
Exactly. Am I going to need to provide small talk breaks for them? I can't do that. Do I have to hire in a person to give them small talk? What are the requirements here for me as an employer of the neurotypical human?
What if they want a Christmas party at the Fed?
We probably would exactly want that. That's where you would have to. This is where solidarity is important, and small organisations who are inadvertently employing neurotypicals would team up together and send them all off for a Christmas party somewhere together, and it would all be fine. Oh my God, the thought of it is quite scary. Oh, I'm sorry, all the employers who I've not empathised with for being scared about employing autistic people. Reversing it, I understand now.
And on one hand, small organizations, maybe even new organizations, have got a bit of sort of room for empathy with it. Waitrose, Asda, anyone that's putting down millions a year in profit. No,
Absolutely none. No,
no,
actually,
I haven't.
no.
Hopefully, you're enjoying our chat and you can show your support by leaving us a tip the equivalent of a cuppa, via the PayPal link on our website at neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk. We would really appreciate your help in keeping our podcast going.
So I am really quite encouraged by this Be Neuro inclusive strategy that Greater Manchester are trying out. So they've got a page on their website, examples of what good may look like. 20% of your workforce is neurodivergent. Brackets anonymised disclosure data, which is reflective of data for the UK population. Well, that's rare to see because people are still saying, oh, 1 in 100. Oh, okay, that's more realistic. Good.
Yeah.
Neurodivergent staff are retained to develop their careers over time, evidenced by employee life cycle stats. Increase in the number of neurodivergent staff recruited to organisations for the first time. Organisations embrace neuro inclusion to innovate more in their sector and reap both financial benefits and industry awards for improved business practices for this area in particular. Ooh, yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, everyone loves the certificate, but at the same time, I think sometimes I don't mind. So, like, when you know how myself and Dad work with the Life Centre all the time, when they got all of their awards because they had completely listened to the communities that we were working with, they were fully engaged with them, they like were with them as much as possible. When they got their awards, I was like, yay! And then sometimes I see people getting awards where I have experience of their organisation, and I'm like, how?
yeah, I suppose uh,
How did
in
that happen?
in awards and then in corporate world,
Yeah.
like,
I
and
mean,
also
everyone loves the certificate, don't they?
it's also quite a neurotypical thing, I think, isn't it? Oh, you're
Yeah.
doing well by like widely accepted standards of performance. But anyway, I suppose they've had to import some sort of metric that they can understand and that makes sense to them. Honestly, I just yeah had a terrible flash of all the awful awards dinners and things that will result. And oh
Look how
God.
nice we were to the autistic. Somebody clap.
Exactly. Yeah, and
Thanks.
it won't even be BSL jazz hands clapping. It'll just be really loud.
Loud. In a really bright room with really flashy lights and a really bad PA system. That is what it'll be.
It is what
There
it'll
you
be.
go.
Oh God. Anyway, still it's trying, I suppose.
Carry on.
Oh, hang on, well, that put me. That was the second to. Oh, there was one more. Oh, okay. Greater Manchester books the Department for Work and Pensions trend data of 70% unemployment rate for autistic people, and it reduces to 40% like all other disabilities. So I suppose they're really wanting definite metrics that they can live up to or down to. And that's good because they are wanting clearly to be held accountable around this. And we know there are many fuzzy areas, many fuzzy areas, but actually, okay, good. Heck of a lot better than things were 5 years ago. I mean, that thing of employing more neurodivergent employees for the first time, like, like you're probably not actually employing neurodivergent employees for the first time
No.
often. It's just ones who are out, or you've asked them, or ones who know they are. So that's the whole. It's always so. It is still quite surprising to me that whenever this is talked about,
It's like
it
it's a new thing.
yeah, and then it can be talked about as if it's not actually a little tip of iceberg, and underneath this all the years of undiagnosed neurodivergence that yeah exists.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. I think the other side of this as well that we should probably cover is that it was in, so I think quite a lot of this stuff now is because there was something called the Buckland Report, which was early 24 put out, which is about autistic people in employment, basically. And some of the statistics, they're still doing that 3 in 10 thing, and some of the statistics are from NAS and I think are quite old. And anyway, not the point. Generally, it's not a bad report. But there's also the conversation that even if we become employed, that there's a massive pay gap. There is a massive pay gap between, the autistic people in the workplace either being underemployed for their skill set because often being moved up the ladder involves networking, smoozing, and an interview process, which isn't necessarily going to work for a lot of autistic people. I also think quite a lot of autistic people, because you're meant to almost be grateful that somebody is tolerating you being their employee, that people are scared to ask for raises, ask for promotions, ask, or even, threaten to leave. I mean, quite a lot of the time, normally, if you want more money, you go and leave and you go and work for another company, and people either give you a raise or you move on. And that's sort of how you build your, up your finances within your career. And that is not as easy for autistic people because the processes of becoming employed or changing employment don't necessarily have anything to do with the skill sets of the job.
No, gosh, that's such a, yeah, that's a brilliant list of why and how that pay gap might be sustained and should be tackled. And actually, so on a list of good things we're doing to be neuro inclusive, one of the things would be consciously addressing any neurodivergent pay
Pay
gap,
gap.
basically.
Because I
Yeah.
do think people, large employers now have to list female to male pay gap, don't they? Isn't that like required data these days? And I think, would that be the next move? Would the next move be, are you publicising the difference in pay between your disabled staff and your non-disabled staff?
Be, wouldn't it? And then, of course, the intersections there, female disabled staff, ethnic minority disabled female, etc.
And if they're LGBTQIA plus, they're probably knackered.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
So
just
actually,
all of them.
all of them. So that would be actually a brilliant transparent
Mhm.
set of measures, wouldn't it? And I suppose then an employer might argue, oh, yes, but one of the things is, and actually, how far could they argue this? Well, one of the things is obviously, autistic people can't actually do as much of the things. It's not like they can become managers or, of course, they can do fewer things. And that's why they are paid less to reflect that. And then they'd have to then be avert about the less worth thing because actually it turns out that currently how employees are valued is still often by very traditional metrics of, for example, number of days worked, avert productivity on those days worked, fitting into existing structures and ways of doing things and winning awards in a neurotypical way, probably. So it's actually at more fundamental levels that these things would need to be challenged.
I was also thinking, so obviously there's a couple of sort of NHS training programs knocking around where they are required to have autistic trainers. And I noted when I was sort of doing a bit of a look around for this podcast that Paula McGowan, who obviously has the Oliver McGowan training, had started posting on her social media that quite a lot of the autistic trainers that were delivering that training were being offered minimum wage when they were meant to be offered a minimum of a band five pay, which I think's the equivalent of 20-ish, 25-ish grand a year, which I think puts you at roughly £25 an hour, which, by the way, people, is self-employed minimum wage. Just so we can be very clear. It's not actual minimum wage, but like if you are self-employed and you have to have all your own expenses and all your own everything, if you are finding people who are self-employed who are working for less than £25 an hour, like consider it whether it's modern day slavery. Just saying.
Ooh, yes.
And that is my opinion that like £25 an hour is self-employed minimum wage because you have to pay all your own pension and all your own, computers, expenses, electricity. It mounts up. I often think, people think about neurobears and like they have like absolutely because it's on the internet. So how could that be costing us money? And I'm like even just to have neurobears on the internet and available for people to buy is like over 2 grand a year. Like
Whoa.
to be on there.
Yeah,
And for
yeah.
people to be able to stream it is 2K, yeah. And I often think like people are like, oh, it's just on the internet. You can put stuff on YouTube. I mean, yes, but also that still costs like, do you know what I mean?
And actually, and this would be a very big issue to get into in our last few minutes, but it certainly also applies for me in arts world, and it applies generally for neurodivergent people and self-employed people in all sorts of ways. It's about perceived levels of professionalism and the professionalization of what you're doing or not. So, for example, for me as a poet, it can often be seen as, yeah, anyone can write a poem, like in a birthday card or for a funeral or something like that. You're just getting up and saying words, aren't you? And it's like, 20 years experience, great skill and talent and of saying words across a multitude of situations, and so it therefore costs more to get me to say words, because to be honest, there'll probably be better words just saying better said. But there is a yeah.
It's seeing the value in autistic people, autistic experience. I mean, and yeah, I'm not sure we're there yet. I think we're still meant to be grateful for any sort of pennies that are thrown our way.
And we see it also in, and I don't do a lot of this work, but in the work on the speaking circuit or conference circuit where autistic people are asked to speak. And so often we hear stories of autistic speakers not being paid at all, or being offered significantly less than their.
Or even just the exposure. I can't tell you how many times. But the exposure, and I'm like, the exposure isn't paying my electricity bill, though, is it? Or feeding me, or paying for the car I have to drive to you in. Like, nobody's living on exposure.
No. And I mean, it certainly happens to poets too, and musicians. I know would classically be asked to do a particular gig for exposure, and it's kind of exposure to more gigs where you're asked to
Yeah,
do
she asked,
more
I asked to
exposure.
work for free. Yeah,
It's like a
exactly.
pyramid scheme, and people are not asking the serving staff on a particular event to do the serving of the food and drink for exposure. They are recognizing that those staff in that instance, albeit probably on minimum wage, should be paid for their labor, and it's no different actually. Yeah, I mean, obviously subtle uh prejudices and biases will remain. Even, well, I mean, it wasn't a subtle prejudice, was it, with Waitrose and Tom Boyd and basically not paying him? That was an example of very unsubtle prejudice indeed. And perhaps actually, as those prejudices become more underground, that's going to be a further danger point, isn't it? At least we can see the prejudice at the moment.
I think if we have any sort of like, slightly younger listeners who are not at the point where they're paying mortgages, feeding children, and have ridiculously high like electricity bills, like we do when we hit our 40s, consider if you are doing voluntary work, and I'm not demeaning voluntary work. I think voluntary work is brilliant. I've done voluntary work throughout my entire life. Um, However, consider whether, what you are doing is being appreciated, whether it is really a paid role, whether it is, helping your aspirations, your career goals, whether it is helping you network. And realistically, if voluntary work goes on for more than, let's go with 12 weeks, are you actually then just really doing a job? And don't work for free, people. Don't put your heart, your soul, your energy into particularly large corporations that are filled with capitalism for nothing. If you want to do voluntary work, find a tiny charity where everyone else is volunteering and go and do some good.
Well said.
Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypical's Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nic King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk or visit our website, neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk, to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.